Welcome to Museum London. Nice to see everybody out. I am Diane Pierce, Curator of Public Programs here at the museum, and welcome to the public lecture by Cameron Bailey, Artistic Director of TIFF. Bringing Cameron here to London was made possible through a partnership with Western University's School for Advanced Studies in Arts and Humanities, aka SASA, as well as Public Humanities at Western. And both of these entities are in the Faculty of Arts and Humanities, and Dean Michael Mildy will speak in just a moment and will introduce Cameron for us tonight. A few years ago, I began working with Dr. Joel Faflack, who's the chair of SASA, and I also began working with Joshua Lambier, who is one of the leads for the Public Humanities team. And it became clear that we had a lot of really similar interests, even though we had very different mandates. The interests were public matters that matter. So we came up with the idea that we would, from there, design an annual speaker series called Public Matters. And so that's what you've seen the past couple of years on the posters that Western has produced. And this is a fledgling partnership. This is our second one. Second in what I hope to be, a future partnership going forward, as well as, working with that department on other activities as well. So when Joel and Josh suggested Cameron Bailey as a possible speaker, this was last summer, I think, and I was on vacation checking email. And I wrote back, I think in capital letters, yes. Or I wrote back Cameron in capital letters and pressed send. And why is that? Well, that's because, Museum London does a lot of things, and, we have an art and historical mandate, but we do a lot of other programming. Most of it is related to the exhibitions we have on hand, but we have a Canadiana mandate as well. So over the years, we have been screening Canadian monthly films. We did that for 2 years. Then we packaged that into a small film festival. Some of you might have been here for that. And we've done that for 3 years. Last month was our third one, and we showed all documentaries. Canadian filmmakers have that unique point of view, and many films tell interesting tales about other places. In fact, when we say Canadian, it's a fairly diverse population anyways. And people are starting to really recognize that we're not just making specifically Canadian stories, but we're really telling stories that are universal. And this is thanks to how Canada nurtures its film talent. I know it's not always easy out there for you filmmakers, but we should be proud of a system that encourages filmmakers to work abroad. Canadian filmmakers don't lose their identity by doing so. Rather, they're telling stories set in other places, and they're showing sensitivity towards those issues, and they're offering that valued outsider's perspective. So tonight, Cameron is going to speak about all of that. He's going to address those implications of global engagement on our cultural sphere. He's going to probably talk about the effect of all of that on the TIFF as well, and their new initiative going forward in the fall. And of particular interest is Canada's presence, on the international playing field, and the power of art and culture to represent a nation. And I think that's a really important theme to discuss. So I'm going to pass it over to Dean Michael Mildy, and he will take it from there and speak about a few other things and introduce Cameron. Thanks.
Sorry, I'm still a professor at heart, so I can't stand still at the podium. I just have to put my glasses on and wander around a bit. Thank you, Diane, and welcome, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Michael Mildy. I'm the Dean of Arts and Humanities, and my first job is really to thank Museum London for hosting this event. It's really a great pleasure to be here, and it's great to see so many people here in the audience, both from campus and from the community. So thank you for joining us. The Faculty of Arts and Humanities, the School for Advanced Studies in Arts and Humanities, I say that so often I trip over it, and the Public Humanities at Western are all committed to the proposition that the subject matter of the humanities is something that's alive for us right here and right now, and is not something that's reserved for the academy and should be hidden away at Western. I think we really enjoy the opportunity to come out and engage with people. With the School for Advanced Studies, we've developed a curriculum at Western which takes undergraduate education and really integrates community work into it, so that right from the get-go, our students are learning, whether it's English or French or philosophy or whatever, and getting out into the community and seeing how these things interact and how each one enriches the other. And the Public Humanities at Western has really taken a leading position in bringing campus and community together by bringing speakers from both communities to each other's home and discussing issues of real concern and real interest to both sides, and it's been hugely successful. I think film is really just an excellent example of the kind of thing that we're talking about when we talk about how the humanities matter. Film is great, right? Film is entertainment. How many people have seen a film in the last week? One or two. Right? It's entertainment, but it's also a lot more than just entertainment, right? Because it's about art, it's about literature, it's about music, it's about narrative, but it's also about ideas and politics. And then it turns out to be it's also about money, because none of those films aren't going to be made, none of those films will be made unless somebody finds the money to actually put them together and bring them on. So there's going to be stuff about economics that's in the background of film. And then there's the whole thing about celebrity and power, right? So there's a whole bunch of these things that are wrapped up in that very basic experience that we're all wonderfully familiar with of experiencing film. And the humanities allow us to sit back and think about it, right? Because you can watch film two ways. You can sit there and let it just wash over you as a little batch of color and sound and words, or you can sit there and you can think about it and engage with it, and then you'll get a lot more out of it. So tonight, we're actually going to get some serious professional help in how to do that, and it's my pleasure to introduce Cameron Bailey, Artistic Director of the Toronto International Film Festival. Don't applaud yet, because I've got a few more things to say, sorry. You're the warm-up act, right? There's no question here. So as Dean of Arts and Humanities, I get asked, more than I care to say, what can you do with an arts degree? So I get to say, these days, well, you can be the artistic director of probably the most important film festival in North America. How about that? That's pretty good. Because Cameron Bailey has an English degree from the Faculty of Arts and Humanities, 1987. Congratulations. Well chosen. So I think there's a real sort of practicality to the humanities degrees, and Cameron certainly bears that out, not just in the fact that he has a degree, but as I think you'll see in his presentations, and I've talked with him numerous times now, on the engagement, the critical engagement that he brings to film, and how that's born out of sort of the engagement with the humanities. So here's a bit of the bio. Cameron was born in London, England, and he then spent time in Barbados before moving to Canada. He came to Western to study English, thinking that he would pursue a career in journalism. While at Western, he worked at the student newspaper, The Gazette. I think Cameron seconds that, because he says that it was a really highly formative experience. He also took a film course that set him on a different trajectory and propelled him into the cultural sphere. So after graduation, he worked for Now magazine in Toronto, reviewed films for CBC and CTV, and then presented international cinema on Showcase Review. Eventually he found his way over to TIFF, where he worked as a film curator and programmer before becoming the festival's artistic director. He has served on many film festival juries around the world, including most recently at the Beijing International Film Festival and South Korea's Busan Film Festival, as well as the Pan-African Film Festival in Burkina Faso. These days, Cameron sits on the board of Tourism Toronto and is a former board member of the Ontario Film Development Corporation and the Institute for the Contemporary Culture at the Royal Ontario Museum. Incidentally, he's also on the Advisory Council for the School for Advanced Studies in Arts and Humanities. In 2010 and 2011, he was co-chair of the Arts and Culture Working Group of Toronto Civic Action. He was also a member of the Creative Capital Group that prepared a mayor's report on Toronto's cultural sector. Every step of the way, he's brought a reflective and critical approach to the discussion of culture and film. And he's never shied away from tackling the political aspects of films and the film industry. He is internationally recognized as an influential commentator, critic, and creative talent in the world of film. It is a great pleasure to ask you to join me in welcoming Cameron Bailey to Museum London. Cameron.
Thank you. Thank you, Michael. Thank you, Diane. Joel, Professor Faflak, thank all of you for inviting me here. It's great to be welcomed back to London, Ontario. I spent a lot of time, 5 years actually here. You may know that honors degrees at Western are 4 years. I had one misspent year at the Gazette. So if there's a Gazette reporter here, be careful. It's great to be here, especially on a Friday night, and it's great to see so many of you here as well. It's a Friday night, so I don't want to make this too heavy. I want to talk a little bit about TIFF, which used to simply stand for the Toronto International Film Festival. It is now a large organization with over 200 full-time employees, roughly 400 seasonal employees leading up to the festival every year, and 2,500 volunteers. So that's not just for the 11 days of the festival. There are many year-round activities that we do as well. Diane mentioned the film circuit, which is our attempt to take Canadian film especially across the country. We're in about 170 communities across Canada. We have a kids festival, TIFF Kids, which is happening very soon. Starts April 8th in Toronto. We do Cinematheque programming. We do different series, both high culture, low culture, everything in between. And we have gallery shows at our building at TIFF Bell Lightbox as well. So it has grown from simply a film festival, which was how we started back in 1976, and it has become something bigger and something that is a little bit more all-encompassing. We're about to make that next step, which is towards global activities. I wouldn't quite call it global domination, but we are going to try to push out into the world some of what we've been able to accomplish in Toronto. So I want to talk a little bit about that, but I think the first thing I wanted to do, actually the very first thing I should do is introduce you to my son, Tate. You've been watching up on the screen. He had no idea he was going to be part of the show today, but he's my screensaver. But I want to show you just a brief video which introduces the festival to people who may not have had a chance to go, and features some of our nearest and dearest. Let's see if I can get this working.
One of the reasons the festival has such respect the world over is because you keep taking risks.
I'm sure you will like this movie, even though I don't kick any ass.
You have a little bit of a love affair with Toronto, you and your wife?
We do all right here, yeah.
This is just another page to my book, so please enjoy.
We hope you like the film. I'm glad you're here. It's a beautiful theater, a great picture, great sound, and a history of people turning off their cell phones.
Ladies and gentlemen, Jackie Chan. We have a special guest who's come in to say hello to you, Mr. Chris Tucker, Jackie's co-star in Rush Hour. Chris Tucker.
Oh my God, we saw Madonna!
Let's bring out your favorite son first. Ryan Gosling.
I haven't made any movies that are appropriate for you to see.
Toronto Film Festival feels very close and very sort of family-like. So it's really quite special to be here.
So that's TIFF. Let me see if I can. That's part of TIFF, really. I mean, we certainly, I think, emphasize the celebrity side and the red carpet and the excitement of the fans. And that's partly because that's what a lot of people know us for, but I think more importantly, it's because we are a public festival. We consider ourselves to be the leading public festival in the world. The audience experience is a huge part, a very crucial part of what we do every year. We present films from roughly 70 countries, about 300 films every year. Only a fraction of them have people like Madonna and Brad Pitt and Zhang Zi from China and Shah Rukh Khan from India coming to present the films. The vast majority are what we would call world cinema, without big stars in them, but that experience of the audience engagement with those films is really important. The fact that we have filmmakers introducing every screening, that we have question and answer sessions after nearly every screening, that the audience has a chance to engage with the filmmaker, to ask questions, to offer their own responses. That engagement is very important to us, and in fact that's what I think makes it a festival. Simply showing the films wouldn't be enough. As we all know, you can see films almost anywhere these days. So a festival is meant to offer a lot more. Now it's gone. Okay. So let me start here. You've probably heard that famous Northrop Frye quote, which I guess I learned when I was doing my English degree here at Western. That quote about the city of Toronto, which is, "It's a good place to mind your own business." Or maybe you've heard that old description from the late actor and writer Peter Ustinov, "Toronto is New York run by the Swiss." Sadly, it's no longer run by the Swiss. You know, the fact that both of those statements now sound so out of date, I think is due to a whole network of political and social changes that have swept through our city over the past 40 years, primarily immigration, activist politicians from David Crombie to David Miller, various countercultures, alternative media, people like Jane Jacobs and Richard Florida, thinkers who have promoted ideas about urban living. Culturally, though, what I want to suggest is that there's been an evolution of the city of Toronto, of our context for TIFF, from what the author Wyndham Lewis called a sanctimonious icebox to the city we know today. And I think that's due in part, at least, to the rise of festivals. So I work for the Toronto International Film Festival, but there are many others in the city that also have a very profound impact on the culture there. The Luminato Arts Festival, the Pride LGBT Festival, the Caribbean Carnival, which used to be called Caravana, the International Festival of Authors, and many more. And if you look at just film, there are over 70 film festivals in Toronto, and if you go beyond that to Ontario and then across to Canada, there are literally hundreds and hundreds of film festivals. In Toronto, there's a Jewish Film Festival, I think 3 Latin film festivals, Rendezvous with Madness Film Festival, Japanese Short Film Festival, and many others catering to all different kinds of cinema. And that's part of, I think, what has been the success of the city turning into something significant. Now, our festival remains the biggest one, and it is in fact the festival that a lot of the smaller ones have reacted to. We weren't showing enough Japanese shorts, so there's now a Japanese Short Film Festival, and you can trace that all the way back to documentaries. The Hot Docs Film Festival, which has become really one of the world's leading sites for nonfiction film, started as a reaction against the Toronto International Film Festival because they felt like we weren't showing enough documentaries or giving enough voice to documentary filmmakers, and they went off and started their own, and we welcome that. We can never show as many films from every different sector of filmmaking as everyone would like, so it's a good sign for us when other festivals are popping up, and we'll continue to try to show as wide a variety and as diverse a selection as possible. So our festival has 432,000 public attendees. These are figures from last year, 2013. 366 films includes the short film selection. As I said, it's about 70 countries represented, and most of them are new films, North American, international, and world premieres. What that means is that there's also a significant business component to what we do at TIFF. Typically, and it's hard to measure this because not everyone reports, but in terms of the films that are sold after their premieres in Toronto, there's roughly between $30 and $50 million in business that happens in the festival every year in terms of films that are sold to distribution companies in primarily the US and Canada, but also other territories as well. We've got many distributors coming from Europe, from Latin America, from Asia, from Australia and New Zealand to buy the new crop of films that premiere with us every year. That number of festival volunteers is really important, and it has grown significantly over the last, I would say, 3 or 4 years. It's a massive project to put on as many screenings as we do, and we depend on our volunteers. They are rewarded with access to films. They get to see movies at the festival. They're often the ones who are first in line with their tickets. We are really blessed with a very avid cinephile and film buff community in Toronto. Many of them volunteer with us for the opportunity to see films essentially before their friends and family get to. Always interesting, I think, to see who goes to our festival. This is what they look like, a very large woman and a smaller man. She's almost as tall as the CN Tower. So these are roughly the demographics. 60% female, 40% male. Average age 41 years. We are trying to, I think like many arts organizations, to keep an eye on that age figure especially, because we want to make sure that we have a good balance always in our audience between the people who are, as you can see here from both the education level and the income level, people who are well off, middle-aged, middle class, established, and with enough disposable income and leisure time to attend something like a film festival, but we also want to make sure we get younger people in, we get a diverse range culturally into our screenings as well. So we're always looking at these numbers and trying to expand the range as much as possible. We've, over the last, I say, 3 or 4 years, begun to collect statistics on the cultural backgrounds of our audience as well, and we are relatively pleased to note that roughly 8% of our audience comes from what I think used to be called visible minorities or people of color in Toronto. And I'm sure you know Toronto is a very, very culturally diverse city. It's nowhere near a reflection of the actual demographic makeup of the city of Toronto itself, but it's much more than any other arts organization of our size. So we, like the other big arts organizations like the opera and the ballet and the symphony, the major theater companies, and closer to London, like the Stratford Festival, are always trying to make sure that our audience, as much as possible, reflects the communities in which we're actually presenting the work. We like to count this sort of thing, media impressions, just because it's sometimes useful when we're trying to persuade people of the value of being a part of the festival. Not so much filmmakers, but all the many people who support us, corporate sponsors, donors, that sort of thing, just the kind of media impact that the festival has. And it's really just over 1,100 media, which is small by festival terms, that are generating this impact. One of the other things we want to do as part of our attempt to globalize the festival is to shift the mix of media. Right now it's heavily skewed to North America, 75% essentially, and we want to go beyond that. I've spent a large part of the last 3 years going, especially I think, to parts of Europe and Asia to just secure more attention for what we do in Toronto every September. So for a lot of people, though, who attend the festival, it really is about moments like this. It's about having globally recognized stars in a very Toronto context. She didn't arrive by streetcar, I can tell you that much. But this was the premiere of Gravity at our festival in September. And, festivals operate by a certain kind of currency, and the currency is really the caliber of the films that you're able to attract. Caliber both in terms of quality and in terms of want-to-see values. So the films that are the most anticipated of certainly the fall season are the films that we're always looking for. I think the other elements that are important are the people who are able to come with those films and the fact that you can get them before other festivals do. Gravity premiered at the Venice Film Festival just about a week before us. It was their opening night film, and then it came to Toronto. So for many in North America, not just the public audience, but the media and the industry as well, this was their first chance to see it. And if you haven't had a chance to see the film on a massive screen with an audience that really doesn't know much about it yet is really a particular experience. And that's what we try to deliver every year. I was recently on a flight and I was walking back from the back of the plane and I was looking at those little screens that are on the backs of seats now, and there were people watching Gravity on their little seat back screens and 12 Years a Slave and other movies that I think, really need to be seen on a big screen. But people see movies when they can. Our job is to try to get as many people as possible to the event of the premiere of a film. There's a little bit of sort of stagecraft and magic and hocus pocus by which we create that sense of an event. We want to make sure that people continue to come out to premieres at the festival, because we really do believe that there's something unique about the exchange of ideas and opinions and reactions that happens in person when the film is new to everyone and you're not seeing it having heard a million things about it and having read things about it and having seen the trailer already and being worn down by the presence of a film. And that often generates a kind of a so what response after you've heard and seen so much about it. If you had been there on this night in Toronto with Sandra Bullock and Alfonso Cuarón and many other people from the film presenting it, and having heard very little about it at that time, it is a completely different experience, and people were really, I think, quite awed by it, and that's a harder experience to duplicate when you're watching it on your seat back on a red-eye flight somewhere. So that is, part of what we do. We want to make sure also that we are always encouraging the people who attend the festival to kind of enhance and develop their curiosity about movies as well, to push their limits a little bit. Someone who may go to see a big movie with red carpet movie stars, we would then encourage them also to see other films that they may not have heard of at all. It's that process of kind of bringing people along that's very much a part of what we do. Although film is generally seen to be a popular art form, there's much of it that is actually quite challenging and probably demands as much cultural knowledge and preparation as some of the most challenging work in the gallery here. But we want to get people moving from one step to another. What I want to suggest is that process comes not simply from lecturing and not simply from throwing challenging movies in front of people, but this process of having people like Nicole Kidman take a selfie with you, or Hugh Jackman and Jake Gyllenhaal be close enough to touch, is, I think, as important as whatever cinephile knowledge we accumulate in university settings or through reading publications or sitting in lecture rooms. Not everybody back at TIFF believes that because it's a somewhat controversial view, and we do sometimes have to fight I think a misinformed impression that we are only about movie star moments. But I think it's important to understand that this so-called glitz is not meaningless. The public celebration that happens at festivals, the screaming fans and the crowds and all that seemingly silly euphoria does carry meaning, especially in a city like Toronto. If you look at this photograph, you'll, I think, see what I mean, because although this is a completely normal photograph that was one of the many thousands of moments of adulation and celebrity glitz that happened during our festival this past year, where Toronto as a city, and some would say Canada as a country, started with somewhere very different, something that looked a little bit more like this. This is a Toronto festival a long time ago. Anyone care to hazard a guess? Can you locate this for me? Yes? Orange Day Parade. Very good, yes. Very good. This is the juvenile branch of one of Toronto's Orange Lodges, and this is a float at Toronto's annual Orange Day Parade, July 12th, 1919. Many of you will know the Orange Order Protestant Fraternal Society, founded in 1795 in Ireland to commemorate the victory of William of Orange at the Battle of the Boyne on July 12th, 1690. The Orange Order used to be very powerful throughout Ontario. I think you're probably aware of that. From the mid-1800s up through the 1950s, the Orange Order was perhaps the organization with the strongest influence on Toronto's culture. It bound Protestants together and fought terrifying things like bilingualism and Catholic immigration. And their motto was one God, one faith, one empire. This is a somewhat earlier Orange Parade, 1912. Toronto's version of the parade started in 1821, and it ran very strongly all the way up through the 1950s. It's still going. In fact, the Toronto Orange Day Parade is the oldest continuous parade in North America. Does anybody know if that parade happens here in London as well? No? Yes? Not sure? Does not. Okay. All right. Well, you might have been well ahead of Toronto in evolving beyond that. But for over 150 years in Toronto, it was a huge annual gathering, a kind of a street festival. And this is Queen's Park in Toronto, where it packed every available inch of lawn. Most of the mayors and the city councillors for over a century in Toronto were Orangemen. And the last mayor of Toronto who benefited from being a member of the Orange Lodge was Leslie Howard Saunders. He was a proud Orangeman. In 1955, he ran against a new kind of politician, a man who went on to define himself as a mayor of all the people. He wasn't an Orangeman, and he could not be an Orangeman because he was Jewish. His name was Nathan Phillips. This is Nathan Phillips Square. And representative in many ways of the new Toronto. Many of you will know this history if you are from the region or you spend any time in Toronto at all. For me, what was important is what Nathan Phillips did once he became mayor, which was very controversial. He demolished the heritage buildings in the center of the city to modernize Toronto. He tore down Toronto's original Chinatown and the University Avenue Armory, the neighborhood around Old City Hall that was called the Ward, which had been Toronto's black neighborhood before it became Toronto's Jewish neighborhood. Nathan Phillips was the one who tore all of that down and essentially forced the immigrants to migrate somewhere else. And in that place, he commissioned new buildings like this one, Nathan Phillips Square in the Toronto City Hall. The city had never seen anything like it. This is the new City Hall designed by a Finnish architect, Viljo Revel. Robert Fulford, the author, thinker, pointed out in a book about Toronto called Accidental City that what was really revolutionary about New City Hall wasn't this particular building, but it was the square that fronted the building. Nathan Phillips Square was in fact the first public square built in the city of Toronto. We simply didn't have spaces like that before. There were parks, but there were no public squares in the European tradition that were gathering places. So why would a city like Toronto, slowly emerging from the grip of the Orange Order, need something like Nathan Phillips Square? Well, so we could do things like this in it. This is July 12th, 2011. It's the official launch of Caribbean Carnival in Nathan Phillips Square. Remember that date, July 12th? It's Orange Day, 190 years later. This is what it looks like now. So if you look at what's now called the Scotiabank Toronto Caribbean Carnival for a moment, which I continue to call Caravana, that began in 1967 in what you might call the New Toronto as the Caribbean community's contribution to Canada's centennial celebrations. It was Toronto's answer to Expo 67. But not all of Toronto celebrated. There was really a very small vestigial Caribbean community at that point, mostly new immigrants who were disadvantaged economically and culturally in Toronto. But they had two things going for them. They had the moment of civil rights in the US and the independence movements in the former British colonies. There was a kind of an interest in liberation movements of people who were of African descent at that time that maybe has not been that strong since. And the other thing Toronto's Caribbean community had going for it was an idea, and it was that idea of carnival, which I would argue people from the Caribbean, migrants from that part of the world, and from, you could say, Brazil as well, brought to Canada. And this is Carnival in Toronto. So, I think put very simply, Carnival is the upending and the displacement of everything that's good and right and decent, and in its place, everything bad and wrong and raw and unpredictable. Music that makes you feel things that maybe you shouldn't. Dances that you wouldn't do in front of your parents or your children. Costumes designed to shock. Carnival, as it was practiced in Trinidad, but also in Brazil and in New Orleans, is that temporary reversal of the established order so that that established order can in fact continue the next morning. In 1967, Toronto wasn't a state as it used to be. It already had a counterculture. It had the coffee houses of Yorkville. It had Joni Mitchell and Neil Young, and it had seen a student movement take over the University of Toronto and its infamous Rochdale residence. But it had never seen anything quite like this. It was an explosion of culture in a moment of time, and that really was the definition for me of festival. And that was a significant moment in the evolution of what festivals meant, certainly in Toronto, and I would argue in much of Canada as well. But first, the Caravana Parade went straight down Yonge Street, longest street in the country, perhaps in the world, we're not sure, which is exactly what something that's designed to upend the order of the city should do. And then it moved to University Avenue, still appropriate, a big boulevard and still close to the center of the city. And then it moved out to Lakeshore along the lakefront of Toronto. When it moved there in 1991, it stopped being a carnival that was participatory and became more of a spectacle. I've always believed that festivals need participation. They can never be something that you simply go to and watch. Your own engagement, whatever each individual contributes to the party of a festival is really significant. So, what do festivals do to how we experience culture? This is Luminato, big arts festival in Toronto. I think the first thing they do is they establish some sort of communion, coming together to experience culture in groups who may be strangers when they first get together, but share certain common interests. In our case, it's the interest in cinema, or in the people who make cinema. Festivals also, I think, develop some kind of cultural contention because they throw so much art at you all at once. Festivals force you to make aesthetic decisions. In a way, you're curating in your head as you're attending and participating in a festival. Which film should I see? Which film should I not see? Which film should win the prize? Which performance was the best one? And another thing festivals do is they claim space. Festivals allow private citizens to take over public space in the way that carnivals do as well. It's important that festivals spill out onto the streets, that they change the regular order, that they interrupt commuters or business owners or school kids on their way to school and change people's daily routines. Luminato Festival is a multidisciplinary arts festival. It was born in 2007, 40 years after the era that gave birth to Caravana and Caravan, which was a kind of a multicultural food and dance and performance festival that took place in Toronto for many, many years. There have been versions of that in many cities in Canada. Illuminato happened 60 years after the birth of the Edinburgh International Festival, which was the performing arts event that gave birth to a Fringe and then many parallel festivals. And it really has Illuminato's tried to duplicate what Edinburgh set out to do, to bring together different artistic disciplines: theater, dance, classical and contemporary music, film, literature, visual arts, fashion, and design. So festivals have transformed, I think, the culture of our cities. And, you know, with just the missing element perhaps of collaboration, accessibility, diversity, those things are not necessarily already a part of festivals. They have to be built in. This is something that festivals have recently brought to the Toronto area, and that's food. This is the Nighted Up night market that happens in Markham outside of Toronto at the Markham Civic Centre in what's called the GTA, the 905 district. But the principle is the same. This is not in the heart of the city, this is in the suburbs, but this is where a certain community lives that grew up with and knows night markets. And is anybody here from a part of the world where night markets are a common phenomenon? Where you would go out in the middle of the night, eat food? Yes, I see some people in the middle of the room, thank you. So to bring that kind of thing to Toronto, remember, this is a city, and really, I would say, a region where the rules of behavior, social codes were very, very strict until quite recently, epitomized perhaps by the Orange Parade. That has changed radically because there are communities now who grew up with night markets in Seoul and Taipei and Kuala Lumpur and other places. And that idea, first of all, of going out late at night and participating in culture through the night is a new one. So day and night blend into one. Dining and shopping happen late at night. Cooking and eating food outside, not inside. You may remember that in much of Ontario, it was for decades illegal to eat outside. There were no patios. It just didn't exist. It's kind of unbelievable to think of it now. But there had to be changes in municipal bylaws in Toronto and many, many other cities before you could allow people to eat outside, certainly to drink wine or anything else outside. And so, you know, this is again another change in a pretty significant way. So, you know, while the barrier to entry for festivals can vary depending on the price of admission. Some festivals have high ticket prices. Some of them, like this street festival, are essentially free. You can just walk in. There are often more subtle cultural barriers that I think we also have to pay attention to as we're trying to evolve festivals into something that's more all-embracing. And this idea of who belongs at a festival, I think, is really important. At our festival, we're a film event. We are essentially for people who love movies. And that should really be the only defining factor. But in fact, there are others. About 95% of our programming is paid programming, meaning there is a ticket price that is a barrier to admission for some. And we have a small amount of free programming, but it's a small amount. But more importantly than that, I think there are kind of social codes that can often serve as barriers as well. How much do you know about what's going on? Where do you find out this information? Are you reading the newspapers and watching the television channels and browsing the websites where we present our information about the festival? We think about that because we feel like it's important to try to make our programming as accessible as possible and open those doors to as wide an audience as possible. And this is where I come back to where I started in terms of celebrity and that kind of sizzle of the red carpet at the festival, because I think, believe it or not, celebrity, this may sound a little strange, but celebrity can be a democratizing force because celebrity requires fans, and fans take many forms. So Julia Roberts on a red carpet last year for the film August Osage County, and Midnight Madness fans at the Ryerson Theatre in Toronto, which is on the Ryerson University campus and has a notoriously crazed atmosphere. The screenings happen at midnight. They're presided over by our reigning king of schlock and gore and crazy movies, Colin Geddes. And people blow up balloons and dolls to bounce around the theater. They'll scream out and call and cry, shout and laugh and talk to the screen sometimes during the movies. It's a very different atmosphere, but these are fans that we count on as well. So for us, the audience engagement at the festival can take so many different forms. There are people who want to sit in a cinema and watch a beautiful art house film without anyone making a single sound, and we can do that. And there are people who want to watch a movie at the Ryerson with the Midnight Madness crowd, and we can do that too. There are people who will stake out the red carpet to wait for Julia Roberts to get out of a car and sign autographs and take photographs, and they'll do that all day long. And there are others who would think nothing worse than having to even be in the same vicinity as a movie star. And again, there's something at the festival for that. But what we do require is a sense of fandom, a sense of excitement, a sense of engagement with the cinema, and that can take, as I said, many, many different forms. Fans make demands, and this, I think, is a part of that kind of democratizing nature. People sometimes think of celebrities as having a lot of power. In fact, they are completely enthralled to their audience and their fans. I'm sure Daniel Radcliffe didn't want to put on those horns. What are you going to do? Jennifer Aniston came for our closing night film last year, and even years and years after Friends, she's still got a very, very devoted fan base, and they, again, staked out the red carpet and kept her signing fan memorabilia and taking photographs for a long, long time, to the point where the closing night screening started late. But she couldn't simply leave because they are her fans. And fans all want selfies. And the great thing about stars and celebrity as well is that it is a constantly regenerating force. So when we took this picture in September, nobody knew who this woman was. She's now an Oscar winner. So we were at the beginning of that process, as some other places were as well, in terms of framing Lupita Nyong'o as an up-and-coming star, someone who wasn't well-known at the time, but we expected to see great things from. Same thing with Benedict Cumberbatch. He's maybe perhaps a little bit better known by that point. He has his own fans. I think you probably know what they're called. I'm not going to say it. But part of our job is to help replenish that excitement year after year with new people all the time. Here's one that very few of us knew. I spoke a little bit about this this morning in another talk here. This is Lee Jun-ho, who is known by his stage name Squirrel. And he is a star in the K-pop genre. Do people know K-pop? Yes, there's somebody there. Yeah, okay. For those of you who don't, Korean pop music, like sort of bubblegum dance music, slickly choreographed, beautiful young men and women singing the songs, is perhaps one of the most potent and popular pop cultural forms right now. Certainly all across Asia, not restricted to Korea at all, and in many parts of the rest of the world as well, as it turns out in Toronto. So Lee Jun-ho is a member of a band, a kind of K-pop band. He was one of the co-stars of this film Cold Eyes that we showed in Roy Thompson Hall. So Roy Thompson Hall for us means there's a red carpet, there's media there. We had Julia Roberts there a few days earlier, and all of her fans were there. We thought we knew what we could expect. But when we showed this gala and the cast of Cold Eyes came out of their cars onto the red carpet, especially this guy, Lee Jun-ho, this place erupted. It was unbelievable. The reaction of his fans who all came out to try to get close to him, take photos with him, and the ones who came to see it, some of them didn't care about the film, they just wanted to see him. But those who did come to see the film as well, I introduced the film that night, and when he came out on stage, it was like, lightning was erupting inside the theater, just the flash bulbs going off. It was unbelievable. And we've had similar responses when we've had movies from India as well, whether it's Amir Khan or Shah Rukh Khan or Akshay Kumar or other Bollywood stars. You can have a similar kind of reaction. What I like about that is it slightly displaces our historic festival audience, who are confronted with the fact that there is just as much fan passion for stars that they may never have heard of or seen any films from. That demographic slide I showed you at the beginning of the festival, beginning of the presentation of our festival's demographic makeup, there is a kind of a profile of the typical festival goer. Probably I would say, late 40s, early 50s, woman, white, $80,000 to $100,000 household income, and no kids, because you need time to be able to go to movies. And that profile, that persona, who has historically been our sort of typical festival fan, I love it when that person is in the room when people are screaming for Lee Jun-ho or Shah Rukh Khan or Amitabh Bachchan, because then some kind of alchemy happens. And I think it's one of the best things about a festival, when those different audiences can kind of collide and begin learning from each other and talking to each other. This is another one, Pariniti Chopra. She was here for a film called Shuddh Desi Romance, or Random Desi Romance, a couple of years ago as well. She's more of an up-and-coming star, not certainly at the level of an Amitabh Bachchan, but again, for the audience that follows her work and that follows Indian popular cinema. Oh, a fan? Yes? You see? It starts like that. Part of our work at the festival, and this is something I've been very, very keen to do and try to put as much energy as I can into it, is to broaden and deepen how that fan relationship happens and to complicate what it means. These are some others. Access is important as well. Irfan Khan is he's not a Bollywood star, he's a very serious actor in India. He was in Life of Pi. He played the grown-up Pi. He was in a film called The Lunchbox. If you haven't had a chance to see this film, The Lunchbox, yet, please do. It is a beautiful love story set in Mumbai. And has anyone seen The Lunchbox? Yes. Are you serious? What are you doing here? All right. So try to make time this weekend then. See The Lunchbox. It really is a great, great film. So he was here in Toronto at the festival last year, and we did what we call a Mavericks conversation with him. These are on-stage conversations where we're able to delve into that person. It could be an actor, it could be a director's career, their background, how they got to where they are. We leave always a lot of time for the audience to ask their own questions, to engage, and to give them access to these people who are often real objects of adoration for them. The other thing we did is we, in 1983, our festival premiered The Big Chill. And it was significant for us because it was really the first big Hollywood movie that we had been able to premiere. We were still quite a young festival, only a few years old at that point, and we're sort of out knocking on doors in Los Angeles and New York and Paris and London trying to get movies. And this was a movie that the studio at the time wasn't quite sure what to do with. A lot of these actors were still up and coming, and it was an ensemble cast, and it was, they weren't sure what it was really. They decided to bring it to the Toronto Film Festival once we extended our invitation, and then of course it became this incredible phenomenon and a real touchstone for an entire generation. And it's the kind of movie that some people, its fans, have seen many, many times, and they revisit as a way of kind of understanding their own lives as they age. You know, to see The Big Chill when you're 25 years old is different from seeing it when you're 35 or 45 or 55. The Big Chill turned 30 last year, and we invited as many of the people who could make it from the film to return to Toronto and relive that moment of premiering the film 30 years earlier. So we had the director Lawrence Kasdan and his wife, who was a producer on the film and a co-writer, and some of the cast of the film people here mentioned. And we showed the film, and then we had a long on-stage, essentially, I was going to call it a Q&A. It was a love-in. And it was just terrific to feel that emotional reaction, because we had a real mixed audience that night. We had people who had been there 30 years earlier and who remembered the premiere of the film and who had grown up and grown older with The Big Chill. And then we had, you know, their children. Sometimes, you know, parents were bringing their children to see it, or even their grandchildren in some cases. That mixed experience of audiences responding to the film in different ways, some knowing it intimately and knowing all of the dialogue and all of the music, with people who were discovering for the first time, was really an amazing thing to watch. We played the soundtrack as the audience was coming in and getting seated, and you felt that the party was already starting there. It was really a remarkable event. It took a hell of a lot of work to put together, because these are all individuals with complicated agendas, but it was really, really so well worth it. And it was an example of what I think our festival has to do more and more now, which is to not just present films, but present unrepeatable experiences that can kind of only happen once with you in the room. And it is those unique events that I think make and define festivals in a way. So that was something that of which I'm very, very proud. You know, what may look like meaningless glitz of celebrity can carry what I think are the transformative possibilities of art. We showed 12 Years a Slave. We premiered it last year. This is Michael Fassbender and Steve McQueen in a rare light moment at the premiere of the film. This was, I think, one of the most remarkable films of the past year or years. Really the first serious film about the slave experience, and I think as immersive and as experiential as Gravity is. At that first screening at the Princess of Wales Theatre in Toronto, when the film ends, and for those of you who've seen it, you know it ends with music, and there is a moment when the music ends and the credits are finished and the audience doesn't know what to do. And to see it in that environment is also something quite remarkable, because you're sharing that experience of being at sea, being adrift in a way with your own emotional and psychological reactions to the film, and in some ways almost physiological as well, because you know there were people who had been weeping during parts of it. There were people who were feeling very uncomfortable, sometimes physically cold, holding themselves, watching it. There were all kinds of responses, but the significant thing was that the audience shared those responses, and then we brought the director and the actors out, and we had a Q&A, which began quite awkwardly, honestly, because, again, people didn't know what to say, didn't know how to react. But talking through it allowed a kind of a shared response to evolve. And in a way, I mean, I'm not a big believer in this kind of thing, but there was something therapeutic about the experience of talking through the film with other people who had just been through exactly the same experience. It was really quite remarkable. And you know, another example here of how celebrity can be used, Joseph Gordon-Levitt using his own public persona and that of Scarlett Johansson to ask questions about how desire is constructed. And Amir Khan, I mentioned him before, another major Indian star, someone who also has quite a serious reputation. In this case, he was at the festival in 2010 with a film directed by his wife, Kiran Rao, called Dobhi Ghat, which was set in Mumbai. And part of a wave of independent cinema, non-Bollywood cinema in India. And I think this is really, you know, what movies can do. And I think it works at festivals because crowds gather, drawn first by a desire to gather with each other and in the presence of their favorite stars. Our challenge now is to try to export that. We have just drafted a 5-year strategic plan at TIFF, the linchpin of which is going global. We have decided, after having grown our festival to the position it's in now, and having fundraised for and built and opened the TIFF Bell Lightbox, we now want to begin to engage with the rest of the world and to try to do in other parts of the world what we've done in Toronto. One of the main elements of that will be Canadian programming. When I travel around the world, one of the things that I hear most often is, we'd like to see more films from where you come from. We'd like to see more Canadian films. We may know David Cronenberg or maybe Adam Agoyan, but we don't see many Canadian films. Most countries, as I'm sure you know, are dominated by Hollywood films. There are some countries that have very strong domestic film industries, Korea, Japan, India being the main ones. But in any case, there's not much room for Canadian movies in that. So one of the things we'll try to do as a part of our global activities will be to take Canadian films to cities around the world. We may begin that in a small way and then expand it. Will certainly depend on the support of embassies and consulates when we do that. There is, for instance, at the Tokyo Canadian Embassy, a really wonderful theater. It's called the Oscar Peterson Theater. It's about this size, and they can do musical performances, they can do film screenings, and it's essentially on Canadian land in Japan, and that's the kind of thing that we want to begin engaging with. As we do that, it will always be important to think of how the films communicate with the audience there, and what's different when you take Canadian movies from the place where they were made to somewhere else where there's an entirely new audience context, there's a different body of knowledge, there might be different questions about the movie. So we're still working all of that out. Although we have a strategic plan, we don't have yet all of the bullet points in terms of exactly how we're going to do this, but we do know that that will be for TIFF the next big step. We feel like we've learned a lot about how festivals work, how programming can kind of generate meaning from the interaction of the artwork, the film, with the audience. And sometimes that communication between audience and filmmaker through the film is especially crucial and unrepeatable sometimes, as something that is unique and happens only then. We're going to now try to see what happens when we take it out of a place we're comfortable with and a cultural context that we know very well in Toronto, and to do that around the world. We've had some success doing that in Canada. There's a film circuit, as I mentioned, in 170 communities across the country, including here in London. But to go beyond the borders of Canada to a place like Japan or a place like Buenos Aires or Moscow will be very, very different. So that is what the future holds for us. And if we're lucky, we'll have the same kind of success internationally as we've had in Toronto. There's a notion that festivals allow people to belong through participation. And by entering the world of a festival for a limited time, we join with other people through whatever form of culture the festival celebrates. In my case, it's film, but it could be really any art form. And when the festival ends, some part of that joining together remains. There is some kind of communion that lasts, at least that's the hope, from having come together to experience the art as one. Because it's temporary, and because it's limited in time, we can do that. We can set part of our lives aside to join together. But because it is repeated, it's an annual event, it has that cumulative effect. If you attend any festival, whether it's a music festival or a film festival, if you attend it year after year after year, there is a kind of cumulative experience that happens where there's anticipation because you've done it before, but also expectation because you know that something new is going to happen. That I think is also what we're trying to promote, is that idea of every year joining together, every year accepting that invitation to belong more and more to a community. And with luck, and if we're doing it right, that sense of community will strengthen the more often you do it. I would suggest that process of belonging that festivals generate in any city extends beyond the festival itself. That process of coming together at certain moments in time has really done, I think, remarkable things wherever festivals have been successful to offer bridges between what are often very disparate individuals. I would argue that festivals, in a way, dramatize social cohesion. Taking over public space is in itself an act of belonging. Our festival, when it began, took over the Yorkville district in Toronto, and then more recently King Street West. The Luminato Festival takes over Yonge Dundas Square in Toronto and David Pico Square. Nighted Up, that night market festival that I mentioned earlier, takes over the Markham Civic Center. And because they come every year, festivals can teach us how to better own the places in which we live. I'll leave it there. Thank you.